Welcome to Happily Ever Aftermath.
The podcast where we discuss relationships in movies and our relationships with them.
I'm Polina Grinbaum.
And I'm Diana Rojek-Sconard.
Hello, Diana.
Hey, Polina. How's it going today?
It's going well. Very well. This is a very exciting day.
I think it is, because if I may do the honors, I'd like to warmly welcome our guest, Janet Varney, to talk about Sense and Sensibility.
Hello.
Woo.
Thank you for the warm welcome.
Thank you for joining us, and I'm trying to not sound so antsy because this is very exciting. Excellent movie, wonderful presence in our microphones. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, maybe
we're having a little.
Ask me what movie I wanted to cover. Of course, like the kid in me, this sort of teenager in me who felt like I had to be obscure and all of that kind of stuff. I was like, oh, I should come up with something so obscure and like, oh, maybe I should look into like, a sort of more of a queer relationship because that was, that was really important to me growing up, all that kind of stuff. And then at the end of the day, I was like, listen, I've paid way too much lip service to Sense and Sensibility and Emma Thompson in general. I might as well just like go for the gusto.
Oh,
Gusto
we're very
is
happy.
great.
We're big.
Yeah.
We're big Emma Thompson fans here
Just
at the podcast.
wade right
and I'm
into
glad
the
you
Jane
went with your heart.
Austen. Yeah. Good.
No,
I'm in.
excellent.
I'm in. I love 19th century literature. I'm in.
Oh, so
All
good.
in.
Good,
Yep.
good.
And
Okay.
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so 1995, I am just going to pull up, for those who are not as familiar with it as we are, when Eleanor Dashwood's, Emma Thompson's father dies, her family's finances are crippled. After the Dashwoods moved to a cottage in Devonshire, Eleanor's sister Marianne, Kate Winslet, is torn between the handsome John Willoughby, Greg Wise, and the older Colonel Brandon, Alan Rickman.
False. She is
Meanwhile-
not torn in any way, shape, or form. Move on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for reading my
know.
mind.
Yes. No, she's
All right,
not.
let me finish.
No.
No, let me finish this up and then I'll
Great,
get there. Thank you.
Great.
I love
Sorry.
this. All right. No. We
Mhm.
typically have issues with this, but I'm just like, well, this definitely.
No,
wait
I
for
want
it.
to
Okay.
hear it. I love that.
Yeah.
I love when you're like, oh, so this is what they're saying. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, Eleanor's romantic hopes with Edward Ferrars, Hugh Grant, are hindered due to his prior engagement. Both Eleanor and Marianne strive for love, while the circumstances in their lives constantly change. And I have a problem with the word constantly, but let's go back to your original comment about being torn between, just like the song says, torn between two lovers. False.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that makes it sound like she's really actually trying to decide between the two rather than feeling like a mild contempt for one of them because she's become so obsessed with the sort of fancy, the fancy, overextending drama of the emotion she experiences about Willoughby.
Mm-hmm. And
Colonel
it's
Brandon just
like,
comes in at the end.
yeah, let's
I mean,
be
obviously
like,
he cares about it, like he's in love with her, but yeah, she's not torn.
Yeah, like the minute he
course not.
sees her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes.
Um,
Save that
and
for
then,
later.
yeah, and I. Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, wait. Oh no. Well, I don't have to do that part now. So yeah, because I feel like she, it's more that like he's sort of furniture until he is not, and with Willoughby, it's like the romance that she's like read about, right? She's finally
Right.
experiencing the romance that she read about and feels is her due, which is this, the big feelings, the yeah.
Well, one of the people that she cites as, the love that I want to have, like Juliet. I'm like, did you get to the end
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
story?
Yeah.
That kind of matters.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I don't know if I'd be into that, but to each their own. I'm not going to, I mean, this entire podcast is about, learning certain lessons and running with what you want out of love. So I guess is she our our podcast poster child?
Could be.
Oh, all right. Well, then.
Because you've got the two sisters,
Mhm.
right? You've got like the sensible one and then the romantic one. And it's
Right.
like,
Well,
I feel like it is our podcast because often we will the romantic one is the one from, like the first person who watched the movie is the one who, much like Marianne feels like, oh, to die for love or to suffer for love is is kind of the goal. And then
Mm-hmm.
the adult one who rewatches the movie and talks about it is like, I want to have a nice walk.
Totally.
that's good. So, Janet, when was the first time you saw this movie?
Definitely saw it in the theater.
Ooh.
Probably more
Me
than
too.
once.
Oh, repeat watching. Excellent.
Yeah, very
Yay.
early Emma Thompson adopter. I think the first thing
Mhm.
I saw her in was the Tall Guy. I believe it's
Oh.
called The Tall Guy. It's with her and Jeff Goldblum. It's a very strange, kooky '80s movie. There's a sort of like we don't have to talk about this other movie, although I probably could have picked it, and that would have been maybe a fun, obscure romantic comedy pick because it is weird as hell.
Yeah,
But
I've never seen The Tall Guy. Well,
it's
you'll have to
very
come
odd.
back. That's
It's
obvious.
possible you can only watch it on YouTube at this point. I'm not sure, but yeah. So that's a very strange
That's
movie.
never
It's
stopped me.
very silly and it's British, and Jeff Goldblum is an actor who's in a musical version of The Elephant Man, which is very over the top. It's one of the, it's part of this era of movies in the early to mid '80s. I think. I mean, I don't know. Listen, it could be late '80s, but I think of it as being earlier than that. Where like MTV was very new, and so there were a lot of movies that, like, if they were cool alternative comedy movies, there would be some sort of weird musical element where there would be like almost a video inside. Like there was a movie called The Big Picture that Kevin Bacon was in. That right.
Yes.
So the Jennifer Jason Leigh was in, I believe, and so she directs a video within that movie. So there's a lot of like montagey music elements that I think get plugged in. Like there's another movie called Tape Heads with John Cusack and Tim Robbins that also has this sort of, it's this, and then you get into like the Savage Steve Holland movies where there's a wonderful sense of like complete absurdity to a lot of '80s movies that I really love and super kind of cherish, because there's that magical realism that was just kind of part of that era of a lot of movie making, especially, kind of alternative comedy, romantic stuff. And so that kind of fell into that. So it's a very strange movie. And that's like, I was very all about strange movies. And so, and I just loved her. And then to see her also do movies like Impromptu, which was another early movie that she did with Hugh Grant, where she was this, total
yes, I remember
wackadoo other character. Like very quickly when she came on the scene, it was clear that, like many British actors who have all of this formal training, like she could just do anything. And so when it was I remember when it was announced that she was going to adapt the screenplay, I was like, oh my God, she's my favorite. This is going to be amazing.
Yeah, and then to have Ang Lee direct it, I was really excited to have this movie come out too.
Oh yeah, totally. Because The Ice Storm I had loved.
Yeah.
I was behind the curve.
Yeah, all of this is happening in my, I was still in my teens, but I was definitely a huge movie nerd. From very, very early on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I think I'd seen like. Oh, it's sorry. I was really obsessed with Emma Thompson as well. Like, in The Name of the Father, and of course we did Much Ado About Nothing, which is before this film.
Yes, we did, and that was my opportunity to kind of re-examine how amazing she was, because when I was younger, I was fixated on the younger couple, but as I rewatched it, I'm just like, where was this appreciation for Emma Thompson, when I was younger? Oh, I needed to learn that lesson later on. And when I rewatched Sense and Sensibility for this, I was just like, I am just enamored with this story, this, her talent. And I'm kind of sad that, the most recent thing I saw her in was Bridget Jones's Baby, which, she's fine. but it's just completely on the other end of the spectrum. So I'm just like, it feels a little off, but she's still very good.
Yeah, she does a lot of
Maybe we
really.
need to have
She's doing. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying maybe we need to have a Thompson run. Now I'm like looking at her filmography and I'm like, I'm adding that to the list. I'm adding that one to the list. I'm adding that one to the list.
Well, yeah, I mean, like The Remains of the Day and Howard's End are two like
Oh my God.
enormously great romances that are, that have a lot of complexities
Yes.
to them as well.
Yeah, she won
Yeah, I
her
loved
first
Remains of
Oscar.
the Day.
Yeah, first Oscar for Howard's End, which is very cool. And then she did win the best adapted screenplay for this movie. So she's not a one-hit wonder.
She's actually, like, that's one thing I'd love to talk about. Like, I don't generally love movie like I kind of tend to sort of avoid movies based on books that I loved. Because, and especially a lot of these, like, I this is a genre I love, is like basically comedy, kind of comedies of manners. And I feel like the reason is that it's kind of, when you shorten some of these like a lot of these novels, like it tends to sort of be just about the romance, when the kind of interesting part is all of the social dynamics, and the scenes that occur between the love stories, and yet and also I feel like a lot of them focus so much on the love story that they don't, the height of the drama of, like, how sort of desperate and stuck the women in these stories are, doesn't really get conveyed. But I actually think she did an amazing job doing that. Like, she did an amazing job. Like, it's very clear, like those scenes at the beginning, it's so clear that she like, it's, things are dire, and they are forced to move out of this enormous beautiful house. Like, they show them looking at the paintings and having to say goodbye to, to their possessions that they're going, while they're in grief. Like, she did a good job of still keeping all of those pieces in, and still keeping the running time, under 3 hours or under 2.5 hours, which is like, I was really, really blown away by that.
Yeah, I would say I'm sort of cheating a little bit because if you haven't had the chance to read the diary that she keeps during shooting, that also, you can buy, it's the shooting screenplay, and then it also has her journal about, I'm guessing it's not every single page of what she wrote, but there's this, you get such a wonderful sense of what the process of, you get a sense of kind of a snapshot of pre-production, and how many rewrites she was doing and how many edits, and that she was doing it on the fly while they were shooting. Conversations about budget and what they could afford, making huge differences in how she had to revise the script, and again, sometimes on the fly, and arguments with Ang Lee, who has a very different idea in some cases of what makes sense. And, sometimes she went out and sometimes he went out. And ultimately she, I think it would express that the movie was better for that, because there are things that, she would have thought wouldn't have worked, that she then saw after the fact in the dailies and was like, oh my God, he's brilliant. And then, things that she sort of had to explain to him that she felt were really important, to whether it's, the sort of feminist bent of the story, or, the sort of Britishisms of things that he's not as familiar with. And so that I strongly, strongly recommend reading it to anybody who is a fan of the movie, because you will come away with a really interesting understanding of what the production was like. And it's funny and engaging and self-effacing and all the things that you would hope that it would be, based on whatever, understanding and knowledge you have of Emma Thompson as a person.
Oh, that sounds great. I'm definitely going to get that.
I was hunting for it after I turned off the movie. I'm just like, I know Janet talked about the shooting script diary. I gotta find this online right now. And it's now on my it's in the cart. I didn't actually. It's almost it. Yeah.
It's a quick read because a lot of the thing is a script, and and one morning I was talking about it with Brandon, my fiance, and when I had given away, like, I keep getting copies and then I'll give it to somebody, and so I keep having to reorder it over and over, and I had gotten the latest version because I was like, you definitely should read this, and then somehow, and I think it was like a Saturday morning, somehow I ended up reading the entire thing to him out loud. It was like 2 hours of just sitting on the couch, like drinking coffee, reading this diary to him, because it's just so funny and so it's just very interesting, and so yeah, so it hasn't been that long since I just read the whole thing out loud. I may or may not have used a British accent as practice for some time in which it might become important to use one.
I have this vision of you reading to your. No, I have this vision of you reading to your Brandon.
It's true.
It's the movie. You're living it.
It's true. He is a very calming force in my life. So, yeah.
That's so great. Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. Okay, so did either of the couples speak to you, or is it similar to what Polina said about, just kind of the movie as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, obviously we're talking about the actual romance, like love, lust, romance kind of stuff. But with a movie like this, there are so many love stories happening. Obviously there's an incredible and deep and profound love story between the two sisters, which obviously I know is not romantic love, but I think it is so meaningful and is so closely tied to the romantic relationships that they both experience that that sort of feels like it's, indelibly woven in. And then, you have these two relationships that Marianne has, and then it's kind of like you can't look at just one of those, and then you also can't just look at one of the girls, because so much of what Marianne experiences has to be sort of compared to Eleanor. So I may have set ourselves up for brief discussions about each of those things, or just one big discussion where you sort of jump around between them. But if it's important to you that I pick one relationship,
not at all.
Okay. And maybe we could sort of touch on them, since they all kind of inform one another.
No, you need to inform us of your thoughts on it. Yeah, it's just, a lot of the times we pick some sort of romantic comedy, and then of course there's a center, and then the rest of the world just does not exist. And I think it speaks to how good this movie is that it's also intertwined and laced together, that that's why there's so much to attach yourself to.
Yeah.
So feel free to,
and I think,
any thoughts.
Jane,
Go ahead.
And I was just thinking, Jane, this is one of the things I love about it, is Jane Austen, there's so much about the love is so intermingled with a societal situation that they find themselves in. There's always the it's well, you have to find someone that you like. Hopefully you find someone that you love, but they have to have enough money so that you can survive, so that they can survive. And, they've got the parents always cutting off people. And it's it seems like there's just so many layers, which is what makes them so fantastic.
I absolutely agree. And I would say, I think that's one of the many, many, many things that Emma Thompson does so expertly, is that she has, and I'm sure the editor and the cinematographer and obviously very much so Ang Lee, who has his own very specific visions and his own kind of energy, which is, by the way, typically not described as being overtly masculine or testosterone based. But I think the compassion and humor that we'll just go ahead and give it all up to Emma, because why not? And then she can go ahead and give credit to other people. But the way that she, and I think that's one of my favorite things about movies like this, is when you can both, when you can both depict it with the fact in mind that we are a contemporary culture who was going to cringe at a lot of these rules and kind of go like, oh my God, this is outrageous. Like the daughters don't inherit anything just because they're women. And, you know, it's very clear that that the film knows that they need to explain some stuff to us. And that to me, there's a self-awareness in the film that's like, yeah, this is crazy. Like we all know this is crazy. But at the same time, rather than just pointing the finger at that and kind of making fun of it, because there was a lot of humor in the way she and Jane Austen, you know, depict this stuff and sort of call attention to it. There's some making fun of it, but there's also this compassion for it. And there's this sort of like honoring of like, hey, that's how it was back then. And yes, it's ludicrous, but, you know, there were reasons for it. And we, you know, you can sort of extrapolate from that, like, well, that's, you know, an indicator of like how far we've come. And these, you know, that you needed writers like Jane Austen and characters like Marianne to be calling out how ridiculous this kind of stuff is. And so you have, you know, these characters who at times it's like the audience's POV / voice of reason is Eleanor, but yet at times it's also Marianne. So you can, you know, you see Marianne as this person who's sort of shaming her family or embarrassing, you know, her sister, or, you know, doing these things that are considered so inappropriate in the society. And yet at the same time, you as the modern viewer are going, yeah, she's right. Why can't she do this? Why couldn't she, you know? So I think that is wonderful too, is having the two sisters, each one of them has something that the audience, like they're both responsible for being our point of view in a sense, being our voice of reason in a way.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and there isn't one, you know, you like the characters also evolve, even, you know, even the short time period, but they also, you know, to that end, I think so Miriam is the youngest sister who is, she says almost 12. I don't think I forgot how old she is in the book.
Oh, that's the actress's real name. So that's Margaret.
Oh my God, did I do that? I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm sorry.
Margaret, that's a real name.
And,
perfectly understandable thing
so
to
Margaret is I don't know why I have this thing whenever I forget everybody's name and I have to look at it, and then Miriam. So she played by Miriam Francois. Sarah. I think I'm butchering that. So Margaret is the youngest, and she has the most freedom. Like she gets to do whatever she wants. She plays. She doesn't have to participate in society in the same way, and so I think a lot of like the kind of genius of the script is they really use Margaret to like be us as well, right? Like
that's true. That's a good point. I forgot that she's absolutely another way in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like she gets to play, like, because she's, you know, talking about being an explorer. And at one point, when they go to their, you know, they start living on their cousin's property. And they're this really eccentric cousin who's living there with his mother-in-law. And they have these lavish dinners. It's insane. Like the amount of food on the table is insane. And she's like, oh, it's great. Everybody else is kind of annoyed with her because she keeps like asking questions. And Margaret keeps saying, is like, I like her. She talks about things.
That's right.
We never talk about things. You know,
yeah.
I was like, I love that line.
That's great.
Yeah. In between all the sisters, you know, she speaks the most, you know, in the modern times, whereas, you know, Eleanor, she knows how to play the game, but, you know, she didn't make up the rules, whereas Marianne, she's like, no, let's burn it all down and then marry for love. And I think Margaret just wants to be a pirate, and that's great too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, after sitting in those drawing rooms politely, like who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to be a pirate?
Seriously.
Yeah.
That's why every time I watch movies like that, I'm like, God, I would just be one of the people who fainted all the time. Like I can't get hot. I can't wear tight clothing. Like you know, I would be. Well, first of all, I'd probably be confined to a sanitarium immediately as a hysteric. But if I managed to keep it together enough, I would definitely be one of those women who like would, you know, they'd be like, oh, she got herself all worked up arguing about something, and then she just fainted dead away.
Well, to be fair, it was the corset, so
I know I couldn't do it. I mean, there's just like every situation feels like it's set up for me to not be able to breathe properly.
Exactly. It wasn't that the point though. Like, and they take away our pockets and, you know, make it so we can't breathe. So that way it's easier to control us with property ownership.
There you go.
Yeah, I won't even get started on the history of pockets. That's another podcast. I have a lot of, sadly, know way too much about the history of pockets. Yeah, well, and even then, like the clothes were supposed. Oh, great. Okay, next time. Like, I think our audience is like, we'll do a special episode on the history of pockets. I'll send you an article. It's great.
Oh, cool, cool.
There's and they weren't even like, actually at this time there was far less. The clothing was far less restrictive.
Oh, for sure.
Right? They're like wearing those empire waist dresses, so there's less.
Yeah.
They're not as tightly wound, you know, drawn in at this point. It was kind of a good time. You know, if you were going to be restricted, it was probably better than other times. But because then the corset came back. Anyway. All right. Yes, join us next week for the history of costumes, pockets and corsets in Yeah.
I saw a big list of on the IMDb trivia was what outfits also appeared in other period movies, and I thought that was good for them for reusing that, because that stuff is just
funny.
really.
I didn't see that. I didn't look up anything, so I'll have to check that out too. That's really fun.
Yeah, it's pretty expensive.
I saw the same thing. Yeah, it was hysterical. Cool. It was basically the trivia is just a list of clothing that was used in other movies of this time period. It was really good. The dress she wears in this, it was great. Yeah, a lot of alterations. So obviously well made. Obviously they were very well made.
That's right.
Oh yeah.
Survived a lot of shooting. I was a stage manager, and I was getting my equity card. I did a lot of backstage stuff, and we used a combination of vodka and water sprayed under the, you know, at the end of every day, so that things didn't smell as bad the next time you had to wear them.
Sure.
You know, yeah, that was a big deal.
It's a good tip.
I was about to say,
yeah. That's a tip. That's exactly. Yeah. So a little vodka for the spray bottle and a little vodka for the stage manager is pretty much, you know, or the costume girl as I was. Tell me, Janet, so when you saw this movie in the theater and you saw it multiple times, and was it, what like made you want to see it again and again, especially, you know, like we talk a lot about like having, you know, you have the DVD and you're come home from school and it's on in the background while you're doing your homework, or your friends and you watch it every day. But like, there's something about going to the theater and seeing a movie over and over again. Like, what was it?
I mean, for me, I that was also, you know, a period of time in which I would do that depending on the movie. I mean, certainly the movies that I can most remember doing that with would be like this one, and then I mean, I saw Silence of the Lambs a number of times in the theater.
Yes.
I saw L.A. Story a number of times.
I think I did too.
I mean, I just had like, you know, that's one of the things I that obviously that's a digression into why I do my podcast and why I'm so fascinated by the teenage years, but never have I felt so passionately about things that I cared about, and never since. And so that was just an era where I just was so hungry for the things that I admired, or that I, you know, responded to on some kind of emotional level, or was, you know, dazzled by in some way. This obviously is, I guess this is around the same time, but this, for me, this is a perfect movie. I mean, I've always kind of said that. I just think that, you know, for what it is, it's to me perfect. in as much as anything human can be. But I can find really no fault with it. I certainly don't watch it looking for that. So maybe it'd be different if I was, looking to critique it and find things wrong with it. But the performances are just sublime.
No.
The pacing is, perfect,
Oh
and
my God.
and there's so much humor and so much kind of pathos, and again, this kind of like empathetic, like she just takes time, and the direction, all of that. I feel like there's time spent with nearly every character, other than like sort of typical foil, like their sister-in-law or whatever, who's Edward's sister, who's just a hilarious villain, and
then some.
and just a phenomenal performance, and just love to hate her, and she's just like loving playing that role. And so that's always fun when you see somebody who's clearly, I mean, again, this is kind of a meta analysis of it, but for me as an actor, when I see somebody who is clearly having so much fun playing a shitty person, that is something I respond very positively to, because there's some kind of, for me, there's some kind of underlying emotional wink to it that feels like, oh, I recognize you, and you know what I mean? Like you're communicating something to me that allows me to love you as a villain, because while I am completely absorbed by your character, there's some kind of meta conversation happening with the actress underneath that's telling me, and again, I'm like, I know this might be completely bonkers, but to me, I think she's probably a wonderful woman, because there is some sort of relishing of that role that feels very like conspiratorial, like come with me as I play this horrible person. And I think there are actors who achieve that, and there are actors that they play a villain and you're like, I genuinely hate that person, and I'm sure they're great, but like their character is so unlikable that I almost don't want to see this character on the screen, because they're so frustrating to me. Whereas there are villains that you still want to see. I could watch more of her, just because her lines are, the dialogue she's given is so absurd and fantastic, and her behavior is her performance is so great, and so she's a frustrating force, but she's a frustrating force that is part of the kind of symphony of this movie, rather than some movies where like I genuinely hate a character so much that I'm like, I almost can't watch this because it's so frustrating.
I don't want them to come on the screen.
Yeah, I find that a lot with like We Don't Believe You movies, like I have, that are so stressful, because there's like, a number of characters, like the whole plot is predicated on like the protagonist knowing something and trying to prove something, and everyone else like getting in their way and telling them they're wrong or they're crazy. Like those are the kind of movies where I'm like, this isn't not enjoyable. Like I'm getting so angry that it's sort of like, it's stepped over a line at which now I'm just like a basket case of stress. This is not that, this is a movie that is so well balanced that, you'll have this moment of just utter heartbreak, and then you'll have like a big laugh shortly thereafter. There's a lot of resetting, and then there's a lot of stuff that's happening, those things are all happening at once. And so I think that's really extraordinary, because that's sort of taking you on the ride of it just makes so much sense when, for example, we get to these scenes where Eleanor really breaks down, we really understand it, because we ourselves are kind of being taken along for this ride where we have to kind of button up and hold our breaths, and then we can let our breaths out and laugh and or just express frustration or whatever, and then we have to tighten it back up again. And so I think we're really, when you get to those moments where Eleanor is just loses it, again, you don't, it's done so well that you're not like, oh my God, why is she like, geez, like, come on, you're allowed to have feelings. Like you really get why she's been holding on so tightly that, it's so hard to just like let it go and to lose that control.
Right.
Yeah, like it's basically, when it hits, you understand, you're like, everyone's kind of waiting for her to stop crying, like to get herself together. Like her family is like, oh my God, what is, and then they're like, oh, wait, we got to take care of something. We got to take care of this now. And they can kind of leave the room, which isn't made sense. But you really do. you really realize why she can't stop crying, because it's like the dam just breaks, and
Yeah.
all of this anxiety and tension that we've all been living with. And you're right, it is very different than I know what I hate, like those movies that sort of capitalize on that kind of anxiety. Like I have a hard time, I get really anxious too, but for me, it's movies where everything falls apart. You know, everything's supposed to fall apart, and you're just waiting for it to fall apart. Like makes me crazy.
Yeah. Yep, I get that.
Like physical things, not just emotional things, and or logistical things. And so, yeah, you're like, you really see why and why she can't get control of herself again. There's such a great thing. And it's funny, you were talking about you were talking about the basically the villain, and she is so she, like, the first scene you see her, basically she's convincing her husband, who you've just seen promise his father on her deathbed that his second family will be taken care of, and that 500 pounds a year is not enough. And then they say, she's like, she's like, just the slow, sly way she talks him down. Like she doesn't get hysterical. She doesn't, she doesn't put her foot down. She just kind of convinces him. Like, you see how she moves through the world very, very quickly, which is, and why she's so evil is because she just like makes it seem so reasonable to be so horrible.
Yeah, it's great. It's just great.
Yeah,
she's a great character. Yeah,
yeah,
she really,
it's so good. It's so good.
She's very much, yeah, like her whole sort of MO is like, I'm sorry, am I the only reasonable one here? I mean, listen, I feel like I'm stating the obvious here. Like, how stupid do you have to be to not understand this? I'm not. This is not an opinion. I'm stating empirical facts here. I'm sorry to have to be the one to like say these things, but I thought everyone would know this.
Exactly.
So that it seems to me that there's no possible other outcome other than like the rational one, which is what I'm positing. Like, there is no other option.
Yeah.
Which is great,
like,
which starts to feel like our administration in a way.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't apologize. Don't explain.
Yeah, just it's, I mean, this is the way we go.
It's also beautifully cut too, where it's just, tiny hint here as they're in the carriage, and then tiny hint here when they're running this errand, and then slowly things just, decrease. And I think that what's great is that when you're hearing Emma Thompson's character talk about how it's just so difficult because we can't even work for our own living, and we're stuck in this horrible position.
Exactly.
Fanny is able to just take the fact that, she is also stuck in a position where she can't do that, but she has just this tiny, tiny bit of power, and she's able to use it the best way she can. And sadly, that's through moving through society, but it's still working for her.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, like in that one ride, she basically convinced, he goes from 3,000 pounds back to like, oh, actually, yeah, there's no need to give them anything. I mean, they're not going to entertain. Like,
yeah,
I mean, they're not going to like, yeah, they don't need stuff. They don't.
Now that we've stripped them down to this amount, it only makes sense to continue to strip them down. Like, now that we've taken this away, we're doing them a favor by taking this other thing away.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't. What are they going to do with the extra money anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose now, Janet, you had talked about, the various love stories working through this particular movie. Did you notice any instance where you think, any of the love stories just kind of came to a moment where like, oh, this is a moment where people have officially gone from just there to in love?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I'm cheating a little bit because I remember her making a reference in the screenplay, or in the diaries rather, to a moment where she actually does kind of argue. I think she argues with, again, this has still been like weeks and weeks, if not months, since I read the diary out loud. but he makes a
I love
reference
that
to
scene.
the moment that he shoots, it's Ang Lee's idea to shoot the moment of Hugh Grant and Emma Thompson where her shawl falls and he lifts it up and puts it back on her. He
I
just
love
picks it up for
that.
her. And that's like amazing moment of tenderness. And it's this very private moment that we're seeing from afar because, she was so preoccupied with this idea that you would have to like see their faces and see that interaction and hear what they're saying. And that would be kind of because they had to speed through so much. And she makes the same point, Paulina, that you did, that it's, or maybe it was you, Diana, but whoever said earlier on that, these adaptations are tough because they do have to kind of tear through the story and jump forward in time a lot. And she definitely laments that in the diary. So she's highly, highly aware of it. And she sort of, is even almost laughing, like, the sort of hysteria of a writer who's like, what did I agree to do? Like, how am I going to take this masterpiece and cut it down into, these bite-sized pieces or what have you? And so she's really her whole process was like wrestling through what to leave in and what to take out and how to fast forward, how to show these moments of relationship forming that would make it believable, but that, are also, more time is elapsing than you necessarily get a chance to see on the screen. And so those moments are of, real importance to, both her and Ang Lee, and they're kind of trying to figure out where to drop them in. And, is this going to tell enough? Is this going to explain the story enough? Are we going to believe it enough that they've had this chance to, develop this relationship? And so that obviously is a moment that really stands out. And then, so that's that relationship. And then of course, we have our kind of, abrupt meet cutes for Marianne with both, Colonel Brandon. I think it's obviously no coincidence that her first experience with Brandon is him seeing her. Like, she doesn't even see him. Like, and I think that's a wonderful way of setting us up for this relationship that's clearly one-sided, right? Is that, Marianne is not by choice, like not because she's ignorant or anything, but she's just completely unaware that he's even there. His presence is invisible. So his first experience of seeing her, he is invisible to her. And I think that's a wonderful metaphor for, in fact, how the relationship progresses. Whereas, we have it's complete opposite with Willoughby, where, it's this very dramatic moment and he's, and she's fallen and she's wet and it's awful. And he gallops up on a steed and he is all she can see. So it's the exact reverse. And he, dramatically impacts her situation and totally changes, her experience of that moment. And then going forward of, how she perceives her own life and situation. And so, we have those wonderful two juxtaposed pieces of that love triangle or whatever, that also, she, again, and I think it's these moments that she has to kind of, they have to work because there's a lot of time that's going by and a lot of relationships to depict. And you have to get it right in order to, really dial it in and take us forward in a way that we can accept.
Yeah, because there isn't, obviously the manners of the day don't involve like people falling into bed together or even really kissing. I mean, and the scene where Willoughby picks up Marianne is like he's like, may I check if your ankle's broken? And at first I was like, I don't remember him being a doctor. I realized, like, whenever you watch these things, you're always like, God, it's been a long time since I've read this book. I don't remember. And it, like, there's the sensuality of him taking her shoe off is like off the hook.
That's
It's really, they really capture it. And it's like, and then you see her face and she's like, it's the first time she's really been silent. Like, she's either playing piano or she's talking, right? And so, or interacting. And she's like, just like, oh my God, is this like, just, you can tell she just is feeling, like it's probably the first man other than her father to have, to have touched her foot, right?
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, well,
if
yeah.
even her father, like I don't even know why there'd be a
Yeah.
reason for
Yes,
Dashwood, quite
exactly. If
frankly.
even her father.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe one of the, yeah, I mean, I guess, yes, of course, probably not even her father, but yeah, like certainly as she is as an adult, like I was just thinking your dad is like putting on your shoe or whatever, but yes,
I don't think
probably
it's
her
gonna
father
happen.
did not put up her shoe. It was gonna, yeah. But
They had a lot of servants.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, that was something to say.
Right.
I, but just like you really sense that this is the first time, and it really gets you. It got me back to that that thing when you are a teenager, back to being a teenager and being in love. That I remember, like, when you held hands, it was like the most intense thing, in a way that it's not as intense now. It's nice, but it's like it's so intense the first time you like hold hands, or somebody touches your back, or or anything, like even the things that are so innocent, right? it's it's crazy.
Yeah.
And she really captures that, or I mean, Ang Lee, I guess, really captures that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you look at it from the perspective of, and also one of the things that I think is so accessible and that we do love about something like this and about a character like Marianne is that we exist in a culture that is so derivative, and that we understand things with a level of being able to compare it to something that we have no personal experience with, but because we see so many movies and read books, we have all of this way of interacting with the world, and so many depictions of art and experience, that now when things happen that people don't expect or that feel unreal to them, the number one thing I'm sure people say is like, it was like I was in a movie. It was like I was in it was like you hear these discussions
Yeah.
like, oh, the tsunami, it was, I don't know, it was like something out of a movie. This, my friend was
Yes.
murdered. It was so surreal. It was like something out of a movie, right? So we have, as contemporary consumers, we have a very, very, very strong understanding and relationship to this idea of comparing something to fiction, right? And so when you have someone like Marianne, who she herself is talking about wanting to have a relationship like the ones in fiction, you relate to her because you're like, oh my God, she's like me. Like, she wants to have this experience that she's only read about. And so, but in her mind, that's what love is. And,
Yes.
And that's why, obviously, like, we're coming into generations now where people are very worried about Sleeping Beauty and, Rapunzel and all of these sort of like female figures in fairy tales, and where they get their feminism and all that. But, here Marianne has this idea. And so we're right there with her. The meta of that, Marianne is a character that we have come to understand is real because she herself refers to fiction as an ideal. And then she has a moment that we all know, including her, could only take place in a book or a movie or fiction, where this gallant person comes and rescues her. I mean, we know she's a goner. What choice does she have? The situation has been laid out for her to only fall in love madly. Like, she has no choice. No choice. Of course she's going to fall helplessly and immediately in love. And so, that, I think, the sympathy on, the sort of like outside of the big picture, like being able to kind of look at it from far away in that way, you're like, oh no, like there's no way, of course, there's no way she's going to escape this. I think
the sonnet
is wonderful.
Yeah, there's
absolutely.
so many great details. The next day he brings her flowers, and so does the Colonel. Like, he brings her, and the Colonel brings her these beautiful hothouse roses, and Willoughby brings her these wildflowers and she's like, I like these better. And it's like, he's like, I knew it. And I was like, how do you know? I was like, well, of course. And even if she didn't, like, she liked hothouse flowers better because, like,
yeah, you could have
she
flipped
wouldn't
the
think
flowers.
that.
You could have
She'd
flipped the
just be
flowers.
like,
If Colonel Brandon had brought her
yeah,
field flowers, she would have been like, oh, field flowers.
yeah,
And like, you know, she would have justified
yeah,
that no matter what. You're absolutely right.
yeah. And
And
then
the
the
icing.
sonnet thing. I mean,
Yeah.
sorry,
Oh,
Diana.
well, no, that's what I was going to say. The icing on the cake happens to be also like, oh, you love these sonnets? I keep this book of sonnets in my pocket at all times. So
Yeah.
it's just the next
Yeah, it's like
level
she
of just like,
designed. Yeah, it's like she designed her. She designed. It's what she designed, and it's the sort of like, you know, it's the classic fable. If something is too good to be true, probably is. You know, you sort of have this, and you know, in a way, that's kind of like that's the parallel of Emma Thompson, which is so bittersweet, which is that she herself has this, you know, you have this Hugh Grant character who, by all accounts, is just this like perfect fit for her. And it is also fairy tale, right?
Yes.
It may be a gentler version, but he's kind and he's great with her family and he's humble and he's respectful and he's smart and he doesn't care about money. And, you know, so if he and in fact he seems too good to be true and is, because his very nature has caused him to make a commitment that he now feels he cannot break. And so
right.
you have, you know, this irony of, you know, Eleanor kind of raising an eyebrow at how much Kate Winslet rushes in, but she herself has had very little control in what her true feelings are that develop, you know, what seem to be fairly quickly with Edward, which then turns around and bites her in the ass because, in fact, her guy was too good to be true, you know, and it has to, that whole thing has to come back around and resolve itself. And unfortunately, like the sad thing is, of course, is that it wouldn't have righted itself. He was not. He would have stuck to his commitment, and it would have all just been, you know, he would have been in a loveless marriage because he made a commitment that he had to keep.
Yes.
It took the disruptive forces and the selfish people in the story to get the two most altruistic characters what they really wanted, and that's all probably like a second, you know, conversation altogether. But you know, it's definitely that in and of itself is sort of bittersweet. It's like, guys, boy, you really got lucky on this one. You really, really got lucky.
Yeah.
You're lucky other people are assholes.
Yes, exactly. Which is, exactly. Like other people are assholes, which is why you're in this position. But also, they're kind of like they're sort of useful. They're useful in it. Yeah, and you really see how instantly companionable, like he was, because I mean, the moment when like their early meeting is he, you know, everyone's like, he's like, it's clear. It's like, oh my God. So then your brother is just coming. Like, you know, why would they assume that the brother is not just like her? So
well, her other brother is.
Yeah, her other brother is. But and then but when he meets her, and it's like, oh, instantly, you know, Fanny's like, yeah, you can we'll just take over the little girl's room because it's got the best view. And he just so artfully comes in and is like, yeah, I got the family's room. Obviously it was a mistake. I'm just gonna go stay somewhere else. And then also he grasps their situation, and the direness of their situation and the grief, you know, that they're experiencing. And and it's really beautiful, you know, it's really beautiful and sensitive. And of course she's like, she can relax a little bit because people understand that, like, this is a man who actually understands that she's strapped in this position, but that she's having emotions and she's trying to deal with them.
Yeah.
You know, he says to her sister, like, well, I think it was his sister, actually. Now I'm wondering if it was somebody else. But he basically says, well, they're grieving. They are people who are grieving the loss of their father. They'll never be the same again.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that was
it's
his
like,
sister.
yeah, I thought so. For some reason, I thought maybe it was the brother-in-law, but it's not. It's the sister. You're right.
I don't think so.
It's
Well,
so
question
lovely. No, you're right.
question for you, Polina. Do you have a moment
Mhm.
for the couples that you have figured out when they fell in love?
I mean, I think obviously, Marianne and Willoughby, it's like it's first sight, right? Um, the sort of I mean, I'm sure he also loves the fantasy of, uh, of rescuing a
Sure.
woman, right? I mean, that's right. Like, so,
Absolutely.
and I think that, we stick with Marianne, her and the Colonel, like they meet. I think that he falls in love with her at first sight, and it just grows. But then I think I think this is what the movie, wants you to believe, is like basically when when she's convalescing and and he starts reading to her. And I think she realizes that he also has this same kind of romantic vein. Um, Even though he's quite a bit older than her. I think he's supposed to be like 35. They mention it at one point.
I think
Um,
so.
and I forget details. Sorry. I should have written down. And he just sort of starts to read this passage, and earlier she's admonishing Edward for not reading with passion. And I think she really sees, she really starts to seize him as a romantic figure with how he responds to literature. I guess that's my moment. I think that Eleanor and Edward, I don't know. It seems much as a little harder to pin for me. Like I think that they have this really intimate moment where she's watching Marianne play their father's favorite tune, and she's crying, and he turns, and he watches her from the back, like he doesn't even see her face. And when she turns, um, she's has this moment of like, oh my god, I can't be seen crying. But then he sort of gives her this look, and I think he says something, but I think I was so captured by the look, I don't even remember, where he says, I'm, like it's basically like he gets it. He understands. And she's allowed to do this. And then he's like, do you want to go for a walk? Like, I want to, I I want to help you feel better. And I think for both of them, I guess if I were to pinpoint, that would be the moment for me with them.
It's so wonderfully crafted that it's really easy, because every scene that we're redescribing, I'm seeing so much emotion and tenderness there that it's kind of easy for it to be one of them. So don't apologize.
It's also
Yeah.
kind of hard
They
to
just
separate when it's a movie like this, and it's a character like Edward. It's hard to separate when the character is meant to show that she's fallen in love with him, and the fact that we are supposed to fall in love with him immediately. Right, so it's tricky because it's like we are given all of the material to fall in love with Hugh Grant's character from the get-go. So you can say like, well, he fell in love with her, she fell in love with him when he pushed the atlas underneath the table, and they had this like immediate first kind of private inside joke moment. But it's like, okay, yes, that could be when she fell in love with him, but also like that you may also be saying, is that when you, the viewer, fell in love with him? Like, is that maybe that's when you fell in love with him? So I think those
I fell in
lines are
love with
blurred,
him.
and they're meant to be.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a really good point. I think that like uh we I guess like I fell in love with and then I fell in love with him when he just so skillfully handled the whole like staying in the sister's room thing. I just thought I
It's a
was like,
great moment.
wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need, I'm awkward and I need people to like really I admire that. My husband handles some of those things pretty smoothly sometimes, and I admire that about him. Um so I'm like, I wish I was like that. But we're talking about the sister. You kind of mentioned earlier that like the love story between the sisters, and they have a kind of a turning point in their relationship when basically Marianne and Eleanor like basically it's chastises her sister for saying, I have been in torment. Like you think you've been in torment because this is how you respond to things. Because you have this, you've had your heart broken in this very dramatic way. And, but I've been in the same amount of torment. I just don't express it the way you do. And I think, that's a pretty kind of interesting turn where I think they stop becoming older and younger sister and sort of move into the next phase of their, relationship, which is that they're equal. Though actually, then Marianne kind of starts crying, and Eleanor has to comfort her. But I like to think that later on they kind of achieve more of an equal balance.
Yeah, that's those yeah, that when she says, Eleanor, where's your heart, you're just like, oh God, please don't say that. I understand why you're saying that, but don't say that. That's the worst thing you could say.
Yeah, not to mention that Marianne, she, just because you think it has to be happening in this very, very specific way, don't try to voice that onto everybody else around you. It's everyone has their own stories and their own love stories.
Yeah.
But at the same time, but like
exactly.
yeah, but it also completely makes sense. I mean, it's like, well, should we expect her to understand life differently? I mean, that's people have different temperaments, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
she's very young, and again, you sort of empathize because you have this person who's like, this is what I think love should be, and here we are indulging in this movie that is incredibly romantic. So how he who casts the first stone / she who doth, it's like, oh really, am I going to chastise this character for wanting everything to be like a wonderful romantic movie that's making me feel really good right now?
Yeah.
So that's again, it's what's those sort of layers. Uh, and I agree with you that like certainly the burden, whatever responsibility Emma Thompson's character, whatever responsibility she's taken on, Eleanor has taken on in the family, and in terms of like sort of keeping the house together, or being this sort of like it's a wonderful strong household of women. It's not like, in many ways, they
Yes.
they don't need some guy around, and they sort of take turns being a light in the family, whether it's Marianne or Margaret, bringing liveliness and joy and kind of simplifying a situation, or softening a situation just by virtue of who they are, or it is Mom or Eleanor kind of taking things by the reins and putting, getting the train back on the tracks, to mix transportation metaphors. But I do feel like it is a very balanced family. It's like they're, and that's what's wonderful about the moment where Marianne is very ill and Eleanor is desperate for her to not to die. And it's not because it's not like, oh, that's just going to be another thing I have to go through. It's like, no, she needs Marianne, the person that Marianne is. And that is, I think, a wonderful, wonderful moment, because it reminds you that as much as she seems to have to be the voice of reason or seems to have to, take care of situations, that Marianne is incredibly important to her, and she does think of her as an equal. She may not think of her as making the best decisions, but that she respects her sister as a human being and as a friend on such a profound level that it's just, I'm getting teary-eyed just talking about it. It just, that love is so fierce in that moment that, you realize, like, this is not some silly, like, sister she rolls her eyes at. Like, this is her best friend.
No.
And a tremendous light and life in her world. And I just love that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She says, wiping away the tears.
Oh
no, it really is. It was really emotional. Just the depth of feeling and this fear that, like, this is really going to happen. Like, I may lose her.
Yeah.
And again, it's so melodramatic. It's like, and then her fever breaks, and then she's okay. So it's all still so cinematic and so fairy tale-ish. But that, again, it's that balance that this film strikes, which is that somehow it's so grounded somehow, and it has to be the performances are such a huge part of that. It's so grounded that all of these things unroll, like checking a box, like, and then you have the dark night of the soul, literally, in this third act or whatever, and that's very formulaic. But when you are doing it in such a way that you have come to deeply care about the characters and you believe it, you buy it, that's even more a testament to what a great job it is, because there are so many things you can look at and point at and go, well, yeah, that's very conventional storytelling, very conventional. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I mean, I haven't done the Save the Cat exercise on this film, but I'm sure it holds, very tightly to a very basic way of telling a story. And yet, within that series of rules, almost like a sonnet, to just like bring back Marianne's love, that when you have these rules that you adhere to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going to that everything's become pat and unbelievable and just kind of like, yep, here we go. Here's this part. You're so swept up in it that, you're very, very much in the moment and very much feeling what the characters are feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we haven't talked about the relationship with the mom much. And I just want to say a shout out to that, because I feel like it's a character that doesn't get a lot of lines and doesn't have a lot of agency in propelling the story forward. And yet, that relationship is very clear. They really love, they love her. She loves them, and they feel very known and seen by her.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's very much a sense of the humanity of the characters that there's, obviously it's completely and totally key to the story that they are women. That's, indubitable. Like, that's very, very, very important to the story, but it's just as much evident that it is about them as human beings, and that there's that like part of them being women is incidental, even though the other part of them being women is completely tantamount to, I mean, that's just the entire story. And the reason that everything happens, the driving force is their gender. And yet at the same time, the relationships that these women have to each other are just like, it's family, it's human beings. It's this, I'm this kind of person. You are more this. What do I contribute? What can I contribute? What are my weaknesses? What do I accept about others who I love, and what their weaknesses are? And so it becomes, to me, in a sense, like it sort of transcends gender, which that's kind of a shitty thing to say, because that makes it sound like gender stuff is menial. It's not at all. But, I look at the relationship that, for example, I have with my father, and I see it echoed in all of the female relationships in the film. So that's just, one way of saying like the family element of it lives also outside of their gender.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. And what's great about the mom is even though small details that she's still in the dark clothes, she's still in her mourning period, but she can see something kind of blossoming between Eleanor and Edward. And she says like, okay, well, my cousin has invited me out, but let's just stay here for a little bit longer to see. And it's not opportunistic in
Mm-hmm.
that he has money, but instead she's seeing something and she likes what she's seeing happening to Eleanor. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of a nice way of moving it. I'm used to the over exuberant mother from Pride and Prejudice, so seeing this subtle version of
Yeah.
it is refreshing, to say the least.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so I was just also going to chime in with a whole my version of when they fell in love.
Yeah.
So Eleanor, for me, I wrote this down, in the details that Polina was describing. It's actually, I think, when I was very into Hugh Grant's character from the beginning. So, nodding to what you were saying, Janet, about when did we fall in love with him. But
Mm-hmm.
for my perspective, I think it's the moment where Edward is reading to Marianne and she's chastising him for not doing it with enough passion, and Eleanor watching him try again because there is a
Yeah.
ridiculousness of
Oh,
Marianne.
So
Yeah.
sweet.
what a good
It
one. Oh, what a good one.
I forgot about that one. Oh, yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. It's just, and yeah, they just hit us. It's just a relentless 1-2 punch repeatedly of all these wonderful little montage moments of him with various members of the family playing, sword fighting with Margaret outside. And
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
you get hit over the head
Yes.
with it, which is why we were sort of joking about we as viewers
Mhm.
falling in love with him, but it works. I mean, it really works.
Yep.
So Diana, what about some of the other relationships? When do you think?
In all honesty, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's because of the deep romanticness of the scenario. She falls in love very deeply, very quickly with Willoughby, and vice versa, like straight out of a story, as you mentioned, Janet. And for Brandon, again, he's looking at her when she's singing. She doesn't realizing it. It's beautifully conveyed by Alan Rickman that that's when it happened, I personally think. And on the other side of it, while Marianne is just very much get away from me, I have this relationship going with not Colonel, excuse me, with Willoughby. She's very neglectful and barely courteous, which is unfortunate. So after she gets
Mm.
ill and then recovers, I think he begins to visit her more often. I honestly think we don't see it because after what happened with Willoughby, she's very guarded. But the fact that she opens up to seeing him, not out of
Mm-hmm.
gratitude, but just out of just slowly opening herself up. It's conveyed pretty well, but I think when he tells her, I won't be back tomorrow, I have some business to attend to, there's this kind of strange hesitation in her that's opening her eyes to it. I don't say that's when she was in love with him. The fact that at one point this consistent present in her life could go away is something for her to try
Yeah.
to open herself up again. So I think it happens off screen, like in between the delivery of the piano and then there's the final scene. So I don't think it happened because she's very guarded, but it's
Right.
there clearly because we
Yeah.
get a very nice ending
Yeah.
scene.
I was just going to quickly say, I think that ties us back to, how these relationships are all intertwined and the fact that her own relationship to Eleanor and her understanding of Eleanor, right, informs so much her ability to look at her own life. She says it herself, we have it in her words. I compare my behavior to what it should have been. I compare it to yours, which is, this beautiful tribute to her, which meanwhile, we're kind of thinking like, well, I don't know, Eleanor, you probably could have, like, I don't know that yours was the ideal behavior either. Like, under the circumstances, you could have been kinder to yourself and said more, what's the perfect balance kind of. But
Yeah.
that through Eleanor and through her own experience, not, her experience with Willoughby, but also like her relationship to her sister maturing, Paulina, which you also pointed out, she's able to understand that romance, has all of these other qualities and that there could be something deeply and lastingly romantic about a man who was able to, because he's not, they do a good job. Again, like Kate Winslet is a wonderful choice because she makes character of Marianne makes so many bad decisions and does so many things that you have to roll your eyes at and go like, well, it's a folly of youth, or, oh, she's just so melodramatic.
Yeah.
And she is dismissive of Colonel Brandon, but that she is incredibly lovable. And so you don't think, I personally don't look at Colonel Brandon as a schmuck. I'm not like, ugh, what a loser.
No.
Like, get over her. What are, this is stupid. It's like, no,
Mhm.
he's a friend of the family and he continues to spend time with her and he knows how wonderful she is. And he's going to be close to the family no matter what happens, whether Marianne ends up with someone else or not. And so her coming to understand, like, wow, he was able to forgive all of these things that he watched me do, not just to him, but just like dumb decisions, and forgive me for them. And he still cares about me and he's still coming around and he's, desperately concerned. He also saved me, which again, that could be a different conversation about like women being saved by men, but that, he has this much gentler, slower version of things, and that you can also, it's up to you how to perceive romance. Like, that's her decision. Her decision can be like, wait a minute, I can decide that what is the most romantic thing to me is the steadfastness and kindness and, warmth and care of somebody long term, and not, will he or won't he, does he, this, oh my God, what's going to happen to me if, blank XYZ.
Yeah, because she learned something from, Willoughby. Like, there's a piece that she didn't see in him, assumed that he was perfect, and he wasn't. And actually, I kind of loved the end of the movie where you see him like sort of alone on a horse, like looking down, like as she exits the church. I love that, like, they pointed out that Willoughby lost a lot. Right? He paid the price for his transgressions as well. And he genuinely loved her.
Yeah.
So satisfying.
No, but I love that too, because I think that's very much a situation where it would be very easy to just have him be, a dick. He was just he thought that it was exciting and he was into it for the excitement. I really like that, the idea that, when he meets Marianne, because this is also something that we can all relate to, it's like a totally clean slate, right? Like, talk about that being appealing. Like, he gets to rescue her. He gets to start off on this wonderful footing where he's the best version of himself without all of the shit that he's done leading up to that point. And so he gets to be this idealized version of himself. He gets to see himself through her eyes, but they are a great match. They are a great match. And so everything that he feels for her can be genuine, and he can still be a person who has made really bad decisions and continues to get in his own way. And he's just one of those people that we all know, where we're like, yeah, he's got a lot of great qualities. Like, it's a shame he's his own worst enemy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Nailed it. All that we've talked about, Janet, have you had any notions on what happens after the movie's over?
I mean, listen, I think we're pretty laid out to know what the future holds. I think that it resolves itself very nicely, in that, we're given the kind of reassurance that despite all of these ups and downs and this very, roller coastery sort of series of experiences that happens in this movie, which is adorable, especially when people are like, oh, period pieces are so boring. You're like, no, this
I love period pieces.
happens. So much happens. Yeah, that you really want them to be able to settle in to just a lovely life together, this sort of lovely life together. So we're given every indication to believe that these are relationships that have been earned, opportunity to last, and really for real companionship and friendship within these, great loves.
Oh, wow. I agreed. I think you lined it up pretty well. And in all honesty, is that you're talking about people who are just like, oh, period pieces. I mean, I'm sorry. Well, what do you want time travel? Do you want, like, invasion aliens type of situation? No, it's the drama of life. And at this point, with everything that I've experienced, I agree with you. I want to see a wonderful marriage. I mean, it's not going to be a marriage of perfection towards the end, but I think what they had to do to get to this point has earned them a very nice, gentle life of being with family, growing their families, and carrying on.
Indeed.
Yeah. And also just the constraint of the times. Like, you know, they show one example of an unhappy marriage, and basically everyone's like, that's an unhappy marriage. Like, that's life. It happens. Some people are unhappy, but everyone stays married.
I mean, I think Eleanor and Edward are one sort of hopes that they are able to create a shorthand in their own relationship to like get their own needs met. And that, if anything, like you could sort of see them being taken advantage of from the outside in some way.
Oh, sadly, we lost Janet. We just lost Janet just as we were wrapping up. Thank you so much for talking about this movie and for letting us see it again, or making me see it again. It was really delightful.
Yeah, it was actually, you can ask Polina, it was my number one goal to get Janet Varney on our podcast, and we now have an announcement. Now that I've fulfilled my life destiny, it is with great trepidation that I now have to end this podcast with sadness. And wait, no, what am I talking about? I'm going to keep going because this was amazing, and
and we can do more.
And I can't think of a better way to thank the amazing Janet Varney by letting our listeners know that you can listen to her podcast, The JV Club. That's available on wherever you can find your podcasts. I am a full-time listener where not only am I listening to her current episodes, but I have backtracked to her 300 plus back catalog of episodes. So I think it's amazing. I think you should do it. She also is part of another comedy series that you can subscribe to called Voyage to the Stars. It's on the kind of sci-fi comedy end, which I think is really great. She also has a IFC series called Fortune Rookie. If you go to the IFC website, you can find that there. I will link to all of these amazing shows as my small token of appreciation for Janet coming onto our show.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love talking to her so much. Yeah, and those JV Club episodes, which is, you know, most of my Varniness lately, is have gotten me through a lot of stressful yet boring stuff recently, and they are full of wisdom, and you can find amazing people. 300 episodes. You'll be amazed. It's everyone from like Connie Chung and Mary Roach to
Marilyn Rice Cobb, Janine Garofalo.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's anyone, if you've ever wondered how anyone was in their teenage years, you'll probably find it there.
It's great. And I will say, you know, be warned, I have cried after listening to a couple episodes. Yeah. So they're not all like that. I promise. They're amazing. They're funny. They're insightful. Yeah. But that's why I am as honored as I was to have Janet on the show. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I cried on the bus listening to it. So just be warned. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for listening this time around, guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for any people who are here because you wanted to hear Janet on our podcast, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And if you want to chime in on what we talked about with Sense and Sensibility, you can reach us at contact@HEAMCast.com. We're on Twitter at HEAMCast.
HEAMCAST.
And you can find some other amazing lady-run podcasts going on social media and searching the hashtag Lady Pod Squad.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what we have. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye.
For our next episode, we're going to be talking about 1998's Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow and John Hannah. Talk to you then.